But so much has happened this week, hasn't it, that's left us in difficulties and in strange situations. We've seen trains cancelled, workplaces closed, roads completely impassable, shops running out of stock. I mean, who knew that you could run out of milk and bread in Tesco? And who knew that it could actually become almost like a new currency for people as they stock up? We had no small groups this week pretty much because of the weather. So much has been changed and so much has been affected. Even for me, I didn't even have a wife this week. The beast from the east stole my wife this week. Lorraine had gone down to a conference. It was the New Wine Leaders Conference in Harrogate this week. And she should have been there for a couple of days back home on Thursday. But she didn't get home until yesterday morning. She got a train to Newcastle. And I had to drive to Newcastle and pick her up and bring her back home. So desperate was her to be in our company again. So just seen so much disruption in our lives because of this weather. But also we've seen positives as well. These weather incidents that happen from time to time, especially with snow. We start to see neighbours and communities come together to help each other out. I'm sure we've probably all experienced teams of people from our street going outside, clearing driveways and roads to try and get the traffic moving again. People unable to get to work, but actually working for their communities and helping each other out instead. We've had in our own street neighbours, you think they're going off to explore some unknown part of the world, but saying, listen, I'm going to take the plunge here, I'm going to Tesco, does anybody need anything? And you're like, yeah, I need bread and milk. But they're not going to come back with that. But people going out their way just to help other people that are in their communities, which has been fantastic. And it's amazing how adversity can bring out the best in us, isn't it? You know, sometimes it takes tough times to bring out the best in people. And you know, some of the great stuff that I've seen this week is not just people helping others, but also seeing people being honoured. And you know, I think it's been great that the emergency services have been applauded and on so much in the news this past few days because they real literally this week they've been putting their life on the lines. We've got neighbours who are in the police, and the first car out the street was my neighbour Ewan going to work on Wednesday or Thursday. I forget what days this all started, but first day of the bad snow, he dug himself out to get to work in the morning, and he's been there ever since. You know, the fire service, the ambulance crews, they're all there doing what they do best. The guys that work on the gritters and the snow ploughs, working round the clock to try and get the country moving again and get people to safety. I love the fact as well that people are being honoured on social media. I've seen, I'm sure, like most of you, we've got a kind of community group Facebook page, and it's just great to see people being encouraged and thanked for what they're doing. I love the one this week where Rachel Smith, one of our people who works at Forth Valley Royal, I'm pretty sure she said she was going to walk to work. Now I know where she lives, and that's not a short walk. But Bill Sharp has a 4x4, so he decided that he was taking his wife Jennifer, who's also a nurse to her work, that he could get her to work at the hospital as well. And I just love the fact that, you know, somebody sees someone with even just a crisis of some kind, and they're stepping in to help. And Bill, once we knew Bill had a 4x4 that could get through the snow, I decided to take full advantage of that, and he became a chauffeur for Kenny and I on Friday, taking us down to Camelon and back. But it's just great to honour people. And for the guys in our church that work in the NHS, you know, for Rachel that I've mentioned, Fee Bush, Jennifer Sharp, Moira Sargent, apologies if I've missed anyone out, but these guys, I know the guys that work in these kind of industries and services do their best to get out so that people are safe. But you know, my favourite piece of honouring that I saw this week was the Edinburgh bus driver who narrowly missed hitting a car on the road. I don't know if you've seen that video clip on YouTube or on social media, but it was amazing piece of skill driving from a double-decker bus on an icy road. And her name is Charmaine Laurie. She's carrying 20 passengers, including school kids, through the snow, and a car slid over into her side of the road, and she managed to do this amazing manoeuvre, missing the car by inches. But I love the fact, I was watching breakfast TV yesterday, and this was like UK national news, and Charmaine was put in front of the cameras to be honoured for saving lives and for doing a fantastic job. And you know what I love about this is it feels like the kingdom of God. It feels like this is the kind of things that God wants us to be doing all the time. It feels like when we're in adversity, the good part of us, which God created, comes to the fore. The image of God that is within us starts to become dominant, become more selfless and become less self-centered, become more helpful and become less selfish. And you know, like I say, we've seen people coming together, clearing snow, motorists stranded out in the motorway being brought food and drink for guys in Denny and Cumbernauld, people out doing shopping. We had one of our neighbours who's a chef, because Tesco had ran out of bread, he made bread. So he made tons of loaves and offered it for neighbours to just come round and pick up a loaf, which is fantastic. And it actually takes me on another story this week that happened within our church. As you know, we have Blair and Lindsay Henderson who run our storehouse ministry. And this week, for the first time, we've got an arrangement now that we've done through the Community Centre Cafe, where we were picking up, or on Monday and Tuesday this week, Blair and Lindsay picked up food from Tesco in the retail park that would otherwise be thrown out because it was close to its sell-by. So they ended up on Wednesday, I think it was, with 60 loaves of bread. And someone, again, on Facebook in their community group page had posted that there was no bread at Tesco. So we had no outlet for the bread because it was going to go to Reunion, but they were closed because of the weather. So Lindsay put a message out and said to her neighbours, if you want bread, come to my house and I'll give you bread. And they just had like a procession of people knocking on their door saying, can I have a loaf of bread? But what was great about that was that Lindsay was also able to talk to her neighbours about why they do Storehouse, why we do what we do, and that we do this as much as we can. We do it on a regular basis because that's what God has called us to do. And once again, in adversity, God is bringing out the best in us and giving us opportunities to share his love. But you know, when we see these things happening where people just go out their way to do things for other people, they're often referred to as random acts of kindness. I've even heard some of the things that we've done as a church described as random acts of kindness. And I like the idea of random acts of kindness. I like what that portrays. I like the ethos behind it. I like it when someone chooses to put someone else's needs before their own. I love it when someone just gives to give, not to try and gain anything in return, not with any motive of what can I get out of that. And at Falkirk Vineyard, we're always looking for opportunities to serve people and communities who are in need. But when, like this week, I see people coming together to be good and kind, I find it both encouraging and challenging. I find it encouraging because I love to see the best coming out in people, but I find it challenging because I think, why am I not like that all the time? Why are we not like that all the time? And in the past few weeks, I've been working on a teaching series that we'll be looking at in church over the next couple of months. And I thought today I'd whet your appetite with that. And a lot of what I'm thinking about bringing over the next couple of months is actually based on our everyday behaviour, how we are, how we speak, what our motives are in everyday life. Now, I haven't come up with a title for it yet, but it's actually grown from a verse in Romans 12, verse 2 that says this, Romans 12, verse 2, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That's the New International Version. The NLT, which is the one we commonly use in church, says this, don't copy the behaviour and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Now, I was expecting us to be doing. I wasn't expecting us to be in church like this today. I've got a short talk already to go for the baptismal service, and I really didn't have anything prepared for this eventuality. And like I said, we're supposed to be baptising people in Carlin right now, but we've had to cancel our plans, as you know. And at the point of realisation that the service was going to have to be cancelled, Kenny and I were looking out over the car park at the community centre, which is under over 2 feet of snow. Nothing had set foot in that car park since Wednesday, I think it was the last time. So it was like a perfect sheet of snow, 2 feet. And as we were kind of walking around the edge of the car park and around the streets, around the centre, I just felt flat. I felt really disappointed because we weren't going to be able to go ahead with church, but probably more feeling the disappointment that we couldn't do the baptisms. And as we were walking away, we walked away from it and we didn't really speak for a few seconds, and I just said to Kenny, there's nothing to discuss here unless you've got a JCB, because that was the only thing that was going to shift this snow. And Kenny's reply was, yep. So we just didn't have a conversation about it. It just was like a resignation to the fact we just can't do it. And then eventually the council took the decision out of our hands anyway by closing the centre till further notice. But very quickly, within a minute or two, Kenny came up with this idea of live streaming a service of some kind out on Facebook. And that really was an example of a transformation of how we think. In my mind, we had to cancel the service. So I go straight into practical mode. We're sitting in the car, and chauffeur Bill's car, by the way. He was just sat. We left him parked at the side of the road to keep the engine running, so we had a warm car to come back into while we were doing the Lord's work. Anyway, we walked back to the car and we're sitting in, and Kenny came up with a different way of thinking. See, I was resigned to the fact that the service was going to be cancelled, and I started going into a mode of, okay, we need to contact the people who are being baptised. We'll need to speak to the small group leaders so they can communicate to the guys in their group, blah, blah, blah. How are we going to communicate this? What are the practicalities? And then when are we going to do the baptisms? Oh, we'll do them next week. So I'm into the old practical mode, which is good and right and proper. That's what leaders do. But what Kenny was doing was like a different way of thinking. How can we turn this from a negative into a positive? And in 2 Corinthians, Apostle Paul tells us that God does actually turn our weaknesses into strength. He turns our weaknesses into opportunities for good. And we've seen that this week through many people. And at a time when we are weak and vulnerable because of the weather, we saw great things happen. The snow weakened us, but great things happened. And we've seen great random acts of kindness. But although random acts of kindness are a great thing, I want to just say something this morning that I think is really important. Random acts of kindness are good, but God isn't random. God doesn't work in random things. God always has a plan. God always acts with a purpose. God always turns bad situations into good. He always has a plan to turn bad situations into good. The works of God aren't played out through circumstance and coincidence or luck or good fortune. God doesn't operate in chaos, and he doesn't do things by chance. And he doesn't want us to operate that way either. And so faced with a situation of disappointment, cancelling the service, not being able to go ahead with the baptisms, I believe God has brought great blessing to our church this morning, because we're doing something that we've never done before. We're doing something completely new to us, but we have a potential now to reach more people this morning than we've ever reached in one go before. And the reason that I believe that we know that God isn't random and that he doesn't operate from chaos is because the first thing we learn about God in the Bible is that he's a creator. God is a creator. But God isn't just a creator, he's a designer. And we read about this right at the beginning of the Bible in Genesis chapter 1. And I'm just going to read this whole chapter just to show that God works from a place not just of creation but of design. So let me just read this. It says this in Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty. The darkness covered the deep waters, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. Then he separated the light from the darkness, and God called the light day, and the darkness night. And evening passed, and morning came, marking the first day. So the first thing God did in his creation was, he had this dark, void, empty place, and he brought light. And then he separated light from darkness. So that was the first thing he did. And then on the second day, he said this, "Let there be a space between the waters to separate the waters of the heavens from the waters of the earth." And that is what happened. God made this space to separate the waters of the earth from the waters of the heavens, and God called the space sky. Evening passed and morning came, marking the second day. So now God has created light, separated from darkness, and then he's taken a water-filled place and separated the water so that the water's in one place and like space in another, which he's called sky. We read on day 3. Then God said, "Let the waters beneath the sky flow together into one place so dry ground may appear." And this is what happened. God called the dry ground land, and the waters seas, and God saw it was good. Then God said, "Let the land spout with the vegetation, every sort of breeding plant and trees that grow seed-bearing fruit. These seeds will then produce the kinds of plants and trees from which they came." And that is what happened. The land produced vegetation, all sorts of seed-bearing plants, and trees with seed-bearing fruit. Their seeds produced plants, and the trees of the same kind. And God saw that it was good. And evening passed and morning came, marking the third day. So God is actually designing here. So he made light to separate light from darkness. He separated water and created space. So we've got sky and we've got sea. And then from the sea, he created land. And then he created vegetation and plant life, etc. You see, there's a structure and an order to what God was doing. He didn't just click his fingers and it all just happened. He had a plan and a design from which he did his creation. Day 4. Then God said, "Let lights appear in the sky to separate the day from night. Let them be signs to mark the seasons, days and years. Let these lights in the sky shine down on the earth." And that is what happened. God made 2 great lights, the larger one to govern the day and the smaller one to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set these lights in the sky to light the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw it was good. And evening passed, and morning came, marking the 4th day. So another layer of design and creativity on what he had already made. Day 5. God said, "Let the waters swarm with fish and other life. Let the skies be filled with birds of every kind." So God created sea creatures and every living thing that scurries and swarms in the water, and every sort of bird, each producing offspring of the same kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, let the fish fill the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth." And evening passed and morning came, marking the 5th day. Now imagine if God had created fish before he created water. Imagine if God had created birds before he created sky. You know, it's not random, it's not chaotic. It's thought through, it's planned, it has a design. Day 6. You still with me? Day 6. God said, "Let the earth produce every sort of animal, each producing offspring of the same kind, livestock, small animals that scurry along the ground, and wild animals." And that is what happened. God made all sorts of wild animals, livestock, and small animals, each able to produce offspring of the same kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make human beings in our image, to be like us. They will reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the wild animals on the earth, and the small animals that scurry along the ground." So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. Imagine if God had made animals and people before he created land. it had been a chaos. It wouldn't have worked. You see, God had an order and a plan and a design for his creation. It wasn't random. And then when he created man and he created woman, that part of creation was so that he had someone who could govern and look after the creation that he had made. You see, God's creation of earth is not a random act. There's planning and order in God's work. God always has a design. You know, quite often in my life, I come across people who describe themselves as a creative type. I'm not really quite sure what that means, but I think it's a kind of go with the flow kind of thing that people say, we just kind of go with the flow. But you know, creativity really requires design. I've actually, as I'm looking at a piece of art done by Sandra Innes, who's in our church. She makes some great stuff. If you go to Sandra Innes Art on social media, you can find her there. I'm sure her prices are very reasonable. But I'm just looking at art there. I've just realised something. If you go down to Sandra's house, sometimes she has a part finished work, something that she's working on. It sits on an easel. And it's actually, when I look at it, what Sandra is doing when she makes these things is maths. They're measured so that the writing that she has on these frames that she's doing, it's properly designed, it's measured out, and it looks amazing. So when you stand back and look at it, you think, man, that's a fantastic piece of art. But actually what it is it's an amazing piece of design. It's an amazing piece of maths, of measurement and precision that she's put together there. And you know, it's important that we don't just become haphazard in the things that God has given us to do. We want to be creative, but we want to be creative with a purpose. We want to do things for God that have a plan and a design behind them. We don't just want to be doing scattergun approach with things, because that's not what God did, and that's not how we should be. One of my creativity usually comes through music. That's pretty much all I have. I play a bit of guitar and I can sing a wee bit. And I used to lead worship in previous churches that I've been in. And you know, the times that were the easiest for me to lead worship was when I'd rock up to a small group on my own with my guitar and just play. I didn't really have to practice too much. I could do what I wanted. And just rock up and play. But you know, sometimes like it was horrific for me, because I'd go to a small group and someone would say to me, I've got a guitar, I could play with you next week. And I'm like smiling, going, great, I'd love you to do that. But what I'm really thinking is, oh no, that means like I've got to think about this now. I've got a second person with me, so I need to actually plan out what I'm doing properly to make it work. You know, it's easy when you're sitting playing guitar on your own and you're doing a worship song, and if I decide that I want to do a different song, or change the key or go somewhere different, I can just do it. There's no one else to consider. But as soon as I add another person into the group, I've got to be more structured. I've got to be more, have a plan. I've got to design what I'm doing. And you know, we've heard some great worship this morning, but you know, Andrew and Ryan didn't just rock up and just like do that randomly. That was planned, it was rehearsed, it was designed, and what you see and what you hear this morning and what you're involved in is actually a great piece of creativity that had a design and a plan behind it. And that's why our worship team, being in the worship team is hard work. These guys practice, they actually practice for the practice. They turn up at a rehearsal already knowing the songs, they've already done some work, so that what we see on a Sunday isn't just some chaotic, on the hoof piece of music or performance. It's something that's been planned and designed, and we get the benefit of that as a church. And you know, I believe that God created the earth in the context of his design, that he planned it out before he did the creation. And you know, when God gives us something to do, when he commands us and when he instructs us, he knows the detail of what it is that he's called us to do. He already has in mind what the outcome is going to be, or what our part is going to be in a bigger picture. And sometimes God gives us the details, and sometimes he doesn't. So let me give an example of that from the Bible. We know the story of Noah's Ark. Noah was asked to do something and was pretty much given every detail of what God had planned out. It says this in Genesis 6, verse 14. This is God talking to Noah. He said, "Build a large boat from cypress wood and waterproof it with tar inside and out. Then construct decks and stalls throughout its interior. Make the boat 450 feet long, 75 feet wide and 45 feet high. Leave an 18-inch opening below the roof all the way around the boat. Put the door on the side and build 3 decks inside the boat, lower, middle and upper." Wouldn't it be great if God asked us to do things with that much detail all the time? You know, Noah was given a great amount of detail. He knew the specifics of what God had called him to do. But here's another example. We read this verse a couple of weeks ago when I was teaching on baptism. This is the Apostle Philip in Acts chapter 8, verse 26, and it says this: "An angel of the Lord said to Philip, 'Go south down the desert road that runs from Jerusalem to Gaza.'" That was it. That was the beginning and end of his instruction. Go south down the desert road that runs from Jerusalem to Gaza. That was all Philip was told. What Philip found when he got there was the story of the Ethiopian eunuch who was reading the scriptures. Philip explained it to him and then he baptized him. So Philip had an instruction, but he didn't have the detail. He didn't have the plan, unlike Noah. But you know, God doesn't always have to give us a plan. What God is looking for us from us is obedience. He's asking us to do what he's telling us to do. He's given us opportunities to see amazing things happen. Imagine if the calling or the call that God gave in your life was go down the road and go and stand somewhere. It's not very exciting, is it? It's not as exciting as being asked to build a ship the size of a cruise liner. But you know, what Noah did and achieved and what Philip did and achieved were as equally important. But the important thing for them was that they followed God's instruction. And you know what I believe is if we do what God tells us to do, he will give us opportunities to take part in his master plan and his great design for this world. God's will. I've been looking at this a lot recently about God's will, because it's something that I've heard taught on a lot in my life through church, and it seems to be the thing that everyone is looking for. What is the will of God for my life? But you know, Matthew chapter 6 has the Lord's Prayer in it, and we actually find out what God's will is. It says this in Matthew 6 verse 10, "May your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." God is looking for earth to become like heaven. God wants us to bring heaven to earth. That is his will. And we find more about the will of God in Jesus. Jesus said this in John chapter 6, verse 38. He said, "I have come down from heaven to do the will of God who sent me, not to do my own will. And this is the will of God, that I should not lose even one of all those that he has given me, but I should raise them up at the last day. For it is my Father's will that all who see his Son and believe in him should have eternal life, and I will raise them up at the last day." What Jesus is saying there is that the will of God for his life was to obey God. That's what Jesus was saying. And you know, as Christians, we want to be more like Jesus. And if we want to fulfill our destiny in God, then the first thing we want to do is do his will. And his will is to do what he tells us. It's to follow his instruction, follow his plan, follow his design. And we might not always have all the detail, but we still want to do what God asks us to do one step at a time. And you know, I've seen many Christians in their lives waste their time in pursuit of God's will for their life. And what I mean by that is, we can end up looking just for the big thing, like the big deal, the thing that we're chasing after, the arc, if you like. But we forget about the Philip stuff. about God's will for Philip at that point was to walk to the end of a road. You know, sometimes we pursue the big things to the detriment of the small things. And you know, what I want us to be looking at over the next few weeks or next couple of months is that how do we live that out in our lives? How do we pursue the will of God for our lives on a day-to-day, hour by hour, minute by minute basis? How do we do at any given time what God wants us to do? And when we do that, I don't believe that we'll be participating in random acts of kindness. I think we'll be participating in kingdom acts. I think we'll be partaking in deliberate acts of goodness and kindness. We're going to be looking at over the next few weeks how we can know what God has planned for us in any particular situation. How can we see God? How can we hear God in every opportunity that comes our way? We're going to look at what would our life would be like if our eyes were open to what God sees, if our ears were open to what God is saying, and to think in the way that God thinks. How can we transform our thinking? How can we transform our behaviour? And as I close, I'm just going to close now with a verse that all this thinking has sprang from. And it says this, Romans 12, verses 1 and 2. It says, here's what I want you to do with God helping you. So that's our obedience to God. Here's what I want you to do. That is our first calling, to obey God. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. What is that? That is us doing the will of the Father. That is us doing what God has called us to do. It goes on to say, embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for Him. If you want to worship God, if you want to please God, embracing what God has done for you is the best thing you can do for Him. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. That is going with the flow. That is living a life where we're just cruising along, not really considering what God is doing. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. Readily recognise what He wants from you and quickly respond to it. That is the opportunities that God brings our way. Readily recognise what He wants from you and quickly respond to it. That's what we want to be, isn't it? We want to be in a situation or have an opportunity in front of us and think, what is God saying here? Why is this person come into my life? Why is this person in my space right now? What does God want me to say? What does God want me to do? What does God want me to give to that person? And then it finishes by saying, unlike the culture around you, always dragging you down to its level of immaturity, God brings the best out of you and develops well-formed maturity in you. And you know what that verse is? Let me just read it again. Unlike the culture around you, always dragging you down to its level of immaturity, God brings the best out of you and develops well-formed maturity in you. That is God revealing His will for your life. Wouldn't it be amazing if in every moment, and everything we do, every place we go, and every word we say, that we were conscious of what God is doing, of what God is saying, and what God is calling us to. Think how transformation that would be in our life, but also in the life of others. Imagine what we could achieve when all these small things all stack up together and amazing things happen. And you know, we have made a bold statement this year of our commitment to see 100 people come to faith in Jesus in 2018. I don't believe that's going to come through a mass service that we do with hundreds of people there. I believe that's going to come through our day-to-day living, through people that you and I will come across and deliver the good news of Jesus to, through our behaviour, through our words, and through our kindness. So my word for you today is, do you want to be more like Jesus? Do you want to know the will of God in your life? Do you want to do the will of God in your life? If you do, then let God transform the way you think. Don't just go with the flow, but go with what God is doing, and let's see what He can do.